I believed I had already lived through the worst kind of loss a man could survive. I was wrong. For 4 years I shared my life with a woman who gave me something I thought grief had taken away forever. And then without warning, without drama, without even a chance to say goodbye, she was gone. What followed wasn't just silence or paperwork or condolences whispered over folded hands. What followed was a reckoning, a quiet one at first. The kind that starts with polite smiles, carefully chosen words, and documents slid across a table. The kind that makes you question not just what you're entitled to, but what you're worth to the people standing across from you. My name is Otis Sterling. I'm 67 years old, and until 3 weeks ago I believed I had already lived through the worst kind of loss a man could survive. By the end of this story, you'll understand how a marriage built on shared loss became a battlefield, how love left instructions behind, and why the people who thought they were about to win everything walked away with far less than they expected. And you'll also see what happens when grief meets preparation, and dignity refuses to be negotiated. Before we go any further, if you've ever experienced loss betrayal or felt invisible in your own family, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one. I lived with Eleanor in a quiet neighborhood in Naperville, Illinois. Tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, the kind of place where evenings settle gently and mornings arrive without urgency. Eleanor died in that house. One moment, she was sitting beside me on the couch, glasses low on her nose, half listening to a show we'd already watched twice before. The next, she was slumped forward, her hand slipping from mine as if she were just tired and needed to rest. The paramedics later said it was a heart attack. Sudden. No warning signs. They told me she likely didn't feel pain. I still don't know whether that's supposed to be comforting. Eleanor was 63. She had lived a full life before me, and one marked deeply by loss. Her first husband had died of cancer years earlier. My wife Eleanor passed the same way 7 years before Eleanor and I met. We didn't meet through friends or work or coincidence. We met in a grief support group, sitting in a circle of folding chairs, both of us saying very little. We recognized something familiar in each other's silence. Neither of us was looking for love. We were just two people who understood what it meant to wake up every day and feel like something essential was missing. Eleanor pursued me gently. She was careful not to rush me, careful not to make promises she couldn't keep. Over time, coffee turned into dinners. Dinners turned into walks. Walks turned into laughter that surprised us both. When she asked me to marry her, it wasn't dramatic. She simply said she was tired of being lonely and didn't want to be brave by herself anymore. I said yes, without hesitation. She had built a life before me. A real one. Eleanor owned a successful specialty food import business, Sterling Heritage Imports. Nothing flashy, but steady and respected. She owned the house we lived in. She had investment accounts she'd managed carefully over the years. I brought very little by comparison. A modest pension. A small house I'd shared with Eleanor years earlier. Eleanor never made me feel unequal. Not once. She told me she'd rather live modestly with someone who truly loved her than be wealthy and alone. We had 4 good years. Real years. We traveled when we wanted. We stayed home when we didn't. We learned each other's habits and flaws and forgave them quietly. I chewed my nails when I was anxious. She hummed when she cooked. We were happy in a way that didn't need to be announced. Eleanor had 2 daughters from her first marriage, Claire and Hannah, both successful, both polished, both living far from Naperville. Claire worked in corporate accounting out east. Hannah ran a marketing agency on the West Coast. Eleanor loved them fiercely, but I saw the distance long before Eleanor admitted it herself. They called on holidays. They asked about her health, and often they asked about plans, about paperwork, about the future. They did not attend our wedding. Work conflicts, they said. Eleanor accepted it without complaint, but I saw the way her smile lingered too long when she spoke about them. My son Daniel came to the wedding. He hugged Eleanor like he'd known her his whole life, and told me later he was just glad I wouldn't be alone anymore. The day after Eleanor's funeral, Daniel drove back to Edmonton. He offered to stay. I told him I needed time to myself. The house felt different without Eleanor in it. Too quiet. Too large. I was still wearing the suit I'd worn to bury her when I sat alone in the living room, staring at a space on the couch that would never be filled again. That's when the emptiness truly settled in. Not just the absence of Eleanor, but the feeling that something else was about to come through that door. Something cold. Something unfinished. And as the last echoes of the funeral faded, I realized grief wasn't done with me yet. They came the next morning. I heard the front door open while I was still sitting in the living room, staring at a coffee mug I hadn't touched. I didn't hear a knock. I didn't hear anyone call my name. Just the familiar sound of the lock turning like the house still belonged to someone else. Claire walked in first. She was dressed the way she always was when she meant to be taken seriously. Tailored jacket hair, pulled back tight phone already in her hand. Hannah followed a step behind her, equally composed, equally distant. They paused when they saw me, as if noticing furniture that had been rearranged. Neither of them said they were sorry for my loss. Neither of them asked how I was holding up. Claire glanced around the room once, then looked back at her phone. "We need to talk about the estate," she said. I waited, thinking maybe that was the opening line, and the rest was still coming. It wasn't. "Your mother just died yesterday," I said quietly. Hannah exhaled the way someone does when a conversation is already taking longer than they planned. "That's exactly why we're here, before things get complicated." I remember thinking how strange that word sounded in my living room. Complicated. As if grief were a scheduling issue. Claire finally looked up at me. "You were married to our mother for 4 years, Otis." 4. Hannah and I have been her daughters our entire lives. "I'm aware of that," I said. "Good," she replied. "Then you'll understand why we need to clear this up now." Hannah placed a folder on the coffee table between us. It was thick. Heavy. The kind of folder that carries decisions instead of paper. I didn't touch it. Our lawyer prepared everything Hannah said. It's a simple acknowledgement. You sign and you formally relinquish any claim to Mom's estate. I stared at the folder. Your mother and I were married. Illinois recognizes spousal rights. We know what the law says. Claire snapped, irritation flashing through her composure. We also know you didn't contribute financially to anything she built. You moved into her house. You lived off her success. And now you expect half of everything. I never said that. You don't have to, Hannah said calmly. The law would say it for you if this went to court. I looked at both of them. Really looked. Eleanor had shown me photos of them as children. Sunburned smiles, birthday cakes, school plays. I couldn't reconcile those images with the women standing in front of me already planning their next step. We're trying to be reasonable, Hannah continued. We're not throwing you out with nothing. Claire nodded. We're offering you $300,000. The number sat in the air like it didn't belong there. Cash, Hannah added. Within 60 days. You move out within 90. You walk away clean. $300,000. She said it like it was a favor, like it was generous, like it should silence any objections I had left. And if I don't sign, I asked. Claire didn't hesitate. Then we contest everything. We have the documentation, emails, messages. Records showing how our relationship with our mother deteriorated after you entered the picture. I never isolated Eleanor from anyone. You don't have to convince us, Hannah said. You'd have to convince a judge. And that could take years. The word years settled into my chest. Years of depositions. Years of lawyers. Years of my wife's name being dragged through arguments she wasn't alive to answer. Claire stood and walked toward the door. We'll give you 3 days, she said. If you haven't signed by then, the offer drops to $200,000. After that, we file. She paused with her hand on the handle. And don't bother changing the locks. This was our mother's house. They left just as efficiently as they'd arrived. The folder remained on the table. I didn't open it. I sat there long after they were gone, listening to the house settle, to the quiet that Eleanor used to fill without effort. I thought about the way she used to mention the girls with a careful softness, as if choosing the wrong tone might make the distance permanent. About how they hadn't come to our wedding. About how their calls always seemed to circle back to planning to arrangements to what would happen someday. I called Daniel that night and told him everything. He was furious. "Dad, this isn't right. You can't let them do this." "I'm tired," I told him. "I just buried my wife." "Then let me help you," he said. "Let me fight." "No," I said. "This is my decision." After we hung up, I went back into the living room and picked up the folder at last. It felt heavier than it should have. Not because of what was inside, but because of what it represented. They thought the story was already over. They thought I was just a signature waiting to happen. The next 3 days blurred together in a way I still have trouble describing. Time didn't move forward so much as it pressed down, heavy and constant like the air before a storm that never quite breaks. I barely slept. When I did, I dreamed of paperwork pages sliding across tables, signatures bleeding through Eleanor's handwriting, dissolving into shapes I couldn't read. The folder stayed where they'd left it on the coffee table. I told myself I wouldn't open it again. I did anyway. Inside were documents neatly arranged, clipped, tabbed, annotated. Everything about them suggested preparation, not reaction. This wasn't something drafted overnight by grieving daughters trying to protect what they thought was theirs. This was structured, considered. There were timelines, contingencies, a settlement offer written in language that assumed I would fold quickly. What unsettled me most wasn't the threat of court. It was the confidence. They weren't asking me what I wanted. They weren't negotiating. They were instructing me. I read the settlement again and again. The language was polite, almost courteous, but beneath it ran a sharp edge. By signing, I would waive any spousal claim to Eleanor's estate, the house, the business she'd built, the investments she'd managed with such care. In return, I would receive a fixed sum and an obligation to vacate the home within 90 days. No mention of Eleanor's wishes, no acknowledgement of the marriage beyond its duration. 4 years. That number appeared everywhere. 4 years, as if time could be weighed that way. As if the nights we sat together in silence counted for less because they weren't witnessed by anyone else. As if grief shared didn't still leave fingerprints. I called a local attorney on the second day, just to ask questions, just to understand my position. He listened, carefully asked a few clarifying things, then sighed. "You have rights," he said. "Strong ones. But they're threatening a long fight. They're banking on exhaustion. Exhaustion." That word followed me around the house after I hung up. It was already living in my bones. I didn't have the energy to fight Eleanor's daughters. I didn't want her memory turned into exhibits and cross-examinations. I didn't want to spend the last years of my life sitting in courtrooms arguing about love with people who had already decided it didn't count. The phone rang again that afternoon. Claire. "We just wanted to check in," she said, her tone clipped professional. "Make sure you understand the timeline." "I understand it," I replied. "Good. Our lawyer is prepared to file immediately if necessary, but we'd prefer to avoid that." I almost laughed at the word prefer. "You know," I said slowly, "Eleanor used to talk about you both." She worried. There was a pause. Not a long one. Just enough to register annoyance. "This isn't about feelings," Otis, Claire said. "This is about fairness. Fairness." The word felt hollow coming from her mouth. Eleanor had warned me gently that something had shifted after her first husband died. That conversations with her daughters had started to revolve around contingencies. Around what-if questions. Around the future as something to be divided instead of lived. They hadn't come to our wedding. They'd said work made it impossible. Eleanor had believed them. Or at least she'd wanted to. Now standing in my kitchen phone pressed to my ear, I realized the request to sign wasn't an isolated act. It was the natural continuation of a pattern, one that had been forming quietly for years. Hannah called the next morning. Her voice was softer than Claire's, but no less deliberate. "We don't want this to get ugly," she said. "Mom wouldn't have wanted that." The irony stung. "Did you ask her?" I said. Another pause. Then, "This is what's best for everyone." By the third day, the pressure was no longer subtle. Emails followed the calls, polite reminders, legal language, deadlines highlighted in yellow. Each message reinforced the same idea: sign now and walk away clean, or resist and lose everything in the noise. I thought about Daniel, about how he hadn't once asked me what Eleanor left behind. Only whether I was eating, whether I was sleeping, whether the house felt too empty. I thought about Eleanor's glasses still resting on the desk in her study, about the half-finished crossword puzzle she'd left behind, about the way she used to say she hated uncertainty more than bad news. By that evening, the weight of it all pressed me into the chair at the head of the dining table. The folder lay open in front of me. A pen sat beside it, exactly where Hannah had placed it days earlier, as if assuming I would eventually sit here exactly like this. They had planned for this moment. And as the sun slipped below the windows and the house filled with shadows, Eleanor would never walk through again. I felt myself being boxed in from every side by grief, by time, by people who believed love could be measured, reduced, and signed away. Daniel called me just after dawn. I hadn't slept. I'd moved from the couch to the chair by the window sometime around 3 in the morning, watching the streetlights blink off one by one as the neighborhood woke up without Eleanor. When the phone rang, I already knew who it was. "Dad," he said. "I've been thinking about this all night." "I know," I replied. My voice sounded older than I felt. Or maybe it was the other way around. "They're bullying you," he said. "That's what this is. Legal bullying. And it works because people are tired." I stared at the folder on the table, still open, still waiting. "I am tired." There was a pause. Then softer: "I can come down. I'll take time off. We'll get you a lawyer who fights." "I don't want you doing that," I said. "Why not?" "Because I didn't want my son learning how ugly this could get. Because I didn't want Eleanor's name turning into a strategy. Because I didn't know how much fight I had left, and I was afraid of finding out the answer was none." "I buried my wife 3 weeks ago," I said. "I can barely make coffee without thinking she's about to walk in and tell me I forgot the filter again." Daniel didn't argue. He let the silence do its work. "You know they're wrong about you," he said finally. "About why she married you. I know. You made her happy." The words caught in my chest. I hadn't cried at the funeral, or when the girls first came, or when the threats started. But hearing my son say that simply without qualification broke something loose. "That should count for something," Daniel continued. "More than money." I closed my eyes. "It doesn't count in court." "No," he said. "But it counts in life." After we hung up, I went into Eleanor's study. It still smelled faintly of her perfume and old paper. Her reading glasses sat on the desk where she'd left them. I picked them up and turned them over in my hands, remembering the way she'd push them up her nose when she was concentrating, the way she'd chew on the pen cap without realizing it. This room had been her place, where she made decisions, where she planned, where she worried quietly about things she didn't want to burden me with. I wondered what she would say if she were standing behind me now, watching me stare at documents meant to erase us. By noon, Claire sent another email. Polite, firm, final. Tomorrow at 10. Their lawyer's office downtown. Bring identification. Bring the signed documents. I printed everything. The printer whirred to life, spitting out pages I didn't want to read again. I lined them up carefully, as if order might make the choice clearer. It didn't. What became clear was the cost of saying no. Court, years of it maybe. Depositions, accusations, people dissecting our marriage as if it were a transaction. I imagined Eleanor's daughters testifying about their mother's vulnerability, about manipulation, about isolation. I imagined myself sitting there trying to explain love to strangers who had already decided it was a liability. I couldn't do that to her. I couldn't do that to myself. By late afternoon, the house felt like it was closing in. Every room held a version of Eleanor I couldn't reach. Her coat still hung by the door. Her mug sat in the sink. I moved through it all like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. I sat down at the dining table again. The pen was cold in my hand. The decision didn't come with clarity. It came with resignation. I signed. Once, then again. Initials where they told me to initial. My handwriting looked shaky, unfamiliar. Each signature felt like I was agreeing to disappear quietly, to fold myself into the margins of a life I'd helped build. When it was done, I gathered the papers into the folder and closed it. The sound was final, heavy. I called Claire. "It's done," I said. "Good," she replied. "No relief, no gratitude, just efficiency. We'll see you tomorrow at 10. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time staring at nothing. The fight drained out of me all at once, leaving behind something hollow and numb. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad in the way people expect. I just felt small. That night, I put on the same suit I'd worn to Eleanor's funeral and laid it across the chair ready for the morning. I didn't know why I did that. Maybe because it felt honest. Maybe because grief and surrender had started to blur together. Before going to bed, I stood in the doorway of our bedroom and looked at the empty side of the bed. I whispered her name once quietly, like she might still answer. She didn't. And as I turned off the light, I accepted what I believed was the end of the story, not with anger, not with dignity, but with a tired kind of peace that comes when you think you've finally run out of options. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my back staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around me. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. Sounds I'd heard 1,000 times before now, stripped of their comfort. Eleanor used to fall asleep quickly, always on her side, one hand resting on my arm, as if to make sure I hadn't drifted away. The space beside me felt impossibly wide. Sometime after midnight, I gave up and got out of bed. I walked through the house slowly, not turning on many lights. The living room first. The couch where she'd laughed at shows she pretended not to like. The dent in the cushion where she always sat. I stood there longer than I meant to, my hand resting on the back of the sofa, as if it could still hold warmth. From there, I went into the kitchen. Her mug was still by the sink. The one with the small chip on the rim that she refused to replace because it felt broken in. I rinsed it, dried it, and put it back in the cabinet, immediately regretting the decision. It felt like erasing evidence. The house wasn't just quiet. It was paused. If you've ever experienced a silence like this when a house suddenly feels too large for one person, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Do you think holding on to these small things helps or makes it harder to move forward? Share your perspective in the comments. I ended up in Eleanor's study without really deciding to. That room had always felt different from the rest of the house, focused, grounded. The place where she handled things she didn't want to worry me with. The desk was neat, but not sterile. Papers stacked carefully. A framed photo of the two of us on a ferry years ago, both squinting into the sun. Her reading glasses lay beside a half-finished crossword puzzle, the pen balanced across the page. I sat down in her chair. I hadn't done that since she died. The leather creaked softly under my weight, unfamiliar with me. I ran my fingers along the edge of the desk, tracing grooves I'd never noticed before. This was where Eleanor planned trips, reviewed contracts, made decisions about the business she'd built with patience and care. This was where she worried about her daughters without saying it out loud. Where she once admitted quietly that she was afraid the girls saw her more as an asset than a person. "I don't think they mean to," she'd said then. but they don't really see me anymore. I wondered if she'd known how this would end. Not the details, just the direction. The folder sat in my briefcase by the door, signed and ready. Tomorrow at 10 I would hand it over. Tomorrow this house would begin the process of no longer being mine. Tomorrow I would step out of Eleanor's life as if I'd only been visiting. My phone buzzed on the desk, startling me. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. At that hour it felt intrusive, even rude. But something about it made me answer. "Hello," I said. "Mr. Sterling." The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and unmistakably tired. "This is Patricia Hall." I straightened in the chair. "I'm sorry who I was, Eleanor's attorney," she said gently. "Her estate attorney." The room seemed to tilt. "I just heard about Eleanor's passing." Patricia continued. "I'm very sorry for your loss. She was a remarkable woman." "Thank you," I said. My throat felt tight. "How did you get my number?" "Eleanor asked me to call you," she replied, "if certain things happened." I closed my eyes. "They did," I said quietly. There was a pause on the line. "Not awkward, respectful. I understand her daughters have approached you about signing documents regarding the estate," Patricia said. "Yes," I said. "I've already agreed." "I know," she replied. "That's why I'm calling." I opened my eyes. "What do you mean, Mr. Sterling?" Patricia said carefully. "I am in possession of Eleanor's last will and testament. It was executed 8 days before her death." My grip tightened on the edge of the desk. "She came to see me 2 weeks before she passed," Patricia continued. "She insisted on updating her will. She said she had a feeling." A feeling. I thought of Eleanor sitting in this very chair, pen in hand, doing what she always did when something mattered. Preparing. "I don't understand," I said. "You will tomorrow," Patricia replied. "You have a meeting scheduled at 10 a.m. Correct, yes. I need you to attend that meeting," she said. "But I need you to do one thing for me." "What's that?" "Do not sign anything until I arrive." My heart was pounding now. Patricia. "What's going on?" "Eleanor loved you very much, Mr. Sterling," she said softly. "She also knew her daughters better than they think she did. Please trust me." This was her decision. She gave me the address of the law office, confirmed the time, and promised she would be there. Before I could ask another question, she said, "Get some rest if you can. Tomorrow will be a long day." Then the line went dead. I sat there long after the call ended, the phone still pressed to my ear. The house felt different now, not lighter, not calmer, but no longer completely empty. Eleanor hadn't left me unprotected. And as I sat in her chair, surrounded by the quiet proof of a life we'd built together, I realized that even in death, she was still one step ahead. If this moment resonates with you, feel free to share a thought in the comments. Sometimes it helps to know we're not the only ones awake in the quiet. The next morning, I put on my suit slowly, the same one I'd worn to Eleanor's funeral. It felt appropriate, though I couldn't have explained why. Daniel had offered to fly in overnight to sit beside me to say something sharp and protective if things went badly. I told him no. This was something I needed to face alone. The law office sat high above Chicago's streets, all glass and polished steel. When the elevator doors opened on the 30th floor, the quiet hit me first. Not the gentle quiet of my house, but the controlled silence of money and decisions. A receptionist checked my name, smiled politely, and led me to a conference room at the end of the hall. Claire and Hannah were already there. They sat side by side at the long table, both dressed in dark, expensive clothes, both composed in a way that suggested they believed this meeting was a formality. A man I didn't recognize stood as I entered. Mid-40s tailored suit watch that probably cost more than my car. "Mr. Sterling," he said, extending his hand. "Michael Grant. I represent Miss Morrison and Miss Morrison." His grip was firm. Professional. Assessing. Claire gestured to the chair across from them. You're on time. I sat. The folder rested in my briefcase at my feet, heavy with the weight of a decision I thought I'd already made. Let's proceed, Grant said, opening his own folder. We understand you've agreed to the settlement terms. This should be straightforward. I'd like my attorney present, I said. Hannah's jaw tightened. That wasn't part of the agreement. We didn't have an agreement, I replied. You made an offer. Grant cleared his throat smoothly. Mr. Sterling, you are of course entitled to representation. I should note that delays may complicate matters. I'm aware, I said. He slid a document across the table. This agreement acknowledges that you waive all spousal claims to Eleanor Sterling's estate in exchange for a cash settlement of $300,000. And what exactly am I waiving rights to? I asked. Grant adjusted his glasses. The residence in Naperville valued at approximately $2.8 million. Sterling Heritage Imports with assets totaling roughly $1.4 million. Investment portfolios valued at approximately $2.3 million. Combined, the estate is valued at just under $6.7 million. The numbers landed with quiet force. So I said evenly, you're offering me less than 5% of my wife's estate. Our mother's estate, Claire corrected sharply. And considering you contributed nothing financially, it's generous. The door opened. Patricia Hall walked in as if she belonged there, which she clearly did. Mid-50s navy suit, leather briefcase, eyes that missed nothing. She smiled briefly at the room before turning to Grant. Apologies for the delay, she said. Traffic. Grant stood halfway out of his chair. And you are Patricia Hall, she replied. I represent Mr. Sterling. She placed her briefcase on the table and added almost casually, I also served as Eleanor Sterling's estate attorney. The temperature in the room shifted. Claire's face went pale. What are you doing here? Ensuring my client's interests are protected, Patricia said, taking the chair beside me, and that Eleanor's wishes are carried out. Grant recovered quickly. We're in the middle of executing a settlement agreement, I see, Patricia said. How much? $300,000. She nodded once. And you advised your clients this was appropriate. Yes. Interesting, Patricia said, opening her briefcase. She removed a single document and laid it flat on the table. Because I have Eleanor Sterling's last will and testament here, executed 8 days before her death. Hannah stood abruptly. That's impossible. She died suddenly. On the contrary, Patricia replied calmly. Eleanor came to my office 2 weeks prior. She insisted on updating her will. She said she had a feeling. I felt the room close in around me. Patricia looked at me briefly. She loved you very much, Otis. Claire shook her head. This doesn't override our rights. You're correct, Patricia said. It defines them. She read aloud, her voice steady. Eleanor left the house, its contents, her ownership interest in Sterling Heritage Imports, and the entirety of her investment portfolios, to her husband, Otis Sterling. Hannah's breath caught. To my daughters Claire Morrison and Hannah Morrison. Patricia continued, I leave the sum of $100,000 each to be distributed upon probate. That's it, Claire whispered. Patricia wasn't finished. There is a conditional clause. She looked directly at them. If either daughter contests this, will pressures my husband to relinquish his rights or initiates legal action to claim a greater share within 120 days of my death, they shall forfeit their inheritance entirely. In that event, their share will be donated to the Illinois Cancer Support Foundation. No one spoke. Claire found her voice first. She wasn't in her right mind. He manipulated her. Patricia slid another document forward. A psychological evaluation conducted 1 week before the will was executed. Perfect cognitive scores. 3 witnesses, including a physician. Grant leaned back slowly, color draining from his face. Why would she do this? Hannah asked, tears streaking her makeup. Because she knew you, Patricia said gently. She told me about the missed wedding, the calls that revolved around planning, the way conversations changed after she remarried. She said you loved her, but you loved her money more. Claire stood, hands shaking. We're contesting this, Then you'll receive nothing, Patricia said calmly, and I will personally ensure the donation is made in your names. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was final. One by one, Claire and Hannah gathered their things and left without another word. Grant followed, already calculating his losses. I sat there stunned as Patricia closed her briefcase. She planned this, I said quietly. Yes, Patricia replied. She wanted you protected. For the first time since Eleanor died, the weight on my chest eased just enough to breathe. The door closed behind them with a soft, almost polite click. No shouting followed. No dramatic accusations echoing down the hallway. Just the absence they left behind, heavy and unmistakable. Michael Grant didn't even look back as he went after them, already reaching for his phone, already recalculating what this meant for his retainer and his reputation. I stayed seated. My hands were resting on the table, palms down, as if grounding myself in the present moment. The room felt larger now, emptier, stripped of the tension that had filled it only minutes earlier. Across from me, the chairs Claire and Hannah had occupied were still slightly pulled back, like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence no one wanted to reread. Patricia watched me carefully. "Are you all right, Otis?" I nodded, though the answer was complicated. I wasn't relieved in the way people expect after winning something. There was no rush of satisfaction, no sense of triumph. Just a strange quiet settling in my chest, the kind that follows a truth you didn't ask for, but can't ignore. She knew, I said softly. She knew they'd do this. Patricia didn't deny it. Eleanor was heartbroken about it, she said. But she wasn't surprised. She told me the distance didn't happen overnight. It grew slowly. Calls became shorter. Visits became conditional. Every conversation seemed to orbit around what would happen someday instead of how she was doing now. I thought of Eleanor's careful tone when she spoke about the girls. The way she'd defend them, even as she admitted in rare, unguarded moments that she felt more like a plan than a person to them. I never wanted her money, I said. I know, Patricia replied. She knew that too. That's why she trusted you. We finished the formalities quietly. Signatures, confirmations, timelines. Everything handled with efficiency and respect. There were no victory speeches, no final jabs. Just paperwork being aligned with intention. When I stepped back into the elevator, the doors closing slowly in front of me, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. I looked older than I had a week ago, but steadier somehow. As the car descended, I felt the weight of the building lift away floor by floor until the street level opened back up, and the city noise rushed in to remind me the world hadn't paused just because mine had nearly fallen apart. Later that afternoon, Patricia called to confirm that Claire and Hannah had formally accepted the terms of the will. No contest would be filed. The $100,000 allotted to each would be distributed as written. The conditional clause would remain untouched. They didn't fight it, she said, not after they understood the consequences. I thanked her and hung up. That evening, I sat alone in the house in Naperville, the light fading through the windows in familiar patterns Eleanor had always noticed before I did. I imagined Claire and Hannah somewhere else entirely. In hotel rooms, in cars, in quiet kitchens of their own. I imagined the shock wearing off, replaced by something harder to name. Loss doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives disguised as unfairness. Over the next few days, I heard things through the narrow channels that remain when families fracture. Claire's husband had been unhappy according to someone who knew someone else. He'd made assumptions about their future that no longer applied. Arguments followed, doors slammed, expectations exposed. Within weeks, he was gone. Hannah sold her agency. Not because it failed, but because she didn't want it anymore. She moved back closer to where her mother had lived, into an apartment not far from Naperville. I never ran into her. I didn't try to. People asked me if I felt vindicated. I didn't. I felt sad. Not for the money they lost, but for what they'd never claimed in the first place. The chance to know Eleanor in those last years, when she was happiest. The chance to see her not as a figure in a balance sheet, but as a woman who had rebuilt herself after grief and chosen love again when it would have been easier to stay guarded. Justice, I learned, doesn't always feel like a celebration. Sometimes it feels like clarity, like the fog lifting to reveal a landscape you wish didn't look the way it does. Daniel came to visit the following weekend. He walked through the house slowly, respectfully, as if aware he was stepping through something fragile. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee, and he waited for me to speak first. She planned for this, I told him. He nodded. That sounds like her. I didn't fight them, I said. But I didn't lose either. Daniel reached across the table and rested his hand over mine. You were never losing, Dad. They just thought you were. That night after he'd gone to bed, I stood in the doorway of Eleanor's study again. The room felt unchanged, but I wasn't. The anger I thought might come never did. There was no desire to retaliate. No urge to gloat. Just the understanding that love, when it's real, doesn't need witnesses to matter. And that Eleanor, even in death, had drawn a line, not in bitterness, but in truth. The law had spoken. Quietly. Cleanly. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt something close to peace, not because I'd won, but because nothing more was being asked of me. 3 months passed before I did anything with the money. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I needed time to hear Eleanor clearly without anger or adrenaline distorting her voice. Grief has a way of making everything urgent, and I didn't want my decisions to come from reaction. I wanted them to come from alignment. The house remained mine. That part was never in question. It wasn't just a property or an asset. It was the place where Eleanor and I had built something quiet and real. I still slept on my side of the bed. I still reached for the light on her side out of habit. Some mornings, I could almost believe she'd just stepped into another room. Sterling Heritage Imports was different. Eleanor had always said the business didn't belong to her alone. It belonged to the people who showed up every day and made it work. After a few long conversations, I signed operational control over to the general manager who'd been with her for years. Eleanor trusted him. That was enough for me. The investments were the hardest part. They were clean, abstract, numbers without fingerprints. And that, I realized, was exactly why they mattered. Eleanor had once told me she hated the idea of money sitting idle doing nothing meaningful. If it's not helping someone, she'd said, it's just waiting to cause problems. That sentence came back to me one afternoon while I sat in her study, sunlight slanting across the desk where she'd planned for a future she knew she wouldn't fully see. That was when the idea took shape. I established the Otis Sterling Foundation. It wasn't large or flashy. No galas, no speeches. Just a simple mission: scholarships for adults returning to education after losing a spouse. People like Eleanor. People like me. People who'd had their lives split into a before and an after, and needed a reason to believe the after could still mean something. Every dollar from Eleanor's investment portfolios went into it. Daniel tried to talk me out of it. You deserve that money, he said, after everything they put you through. I didn't go through all of that to be paid, I told him. I went through it because I loved her. He didn't argue after that. He helped me with the paperwork instead. Daniel visits every weekend now. He says it's to make sure I'm eating properly. I suspect he just likes having a place that still feels like home. We sit at the kitchen table with coffee in the mornings, and sometimes we talk about Eleanor. Sometimes we don't. Both feel right. Claire and Hannah took their inheritances, $100,000 each. They never contested the will. I heard through people who like to fill silence with updates that Claire's marriage didn't survive the disappointment. Apparently her husband had been counting on a future that never arrived. Hannah sold her agency and moved closer to where Eleanor used to live. I don't know why. I don't ask. I don't hate them. That surprised me. I thought anger would linger sharp and justified. But it faded into something quieter. Sadness, maybe. Not for what they lost financially, but for what they never chose to have. They'll never know what it was like to see their mother laugh again after years of grief. They'll never understand who she became when she stopped being afraid of loving someone fully. They lost more than money. They lost context. As for me, I'm 67 years old. I live alone in a house that's a little too big and a little too quiet. Every morning I make coffee in the kitchen where Eleanor used to read her crossword puzzles. Every evening I sit in the living room where we watch the same shows over and over because she liked knowing how they ended. Sometimes when the house is very still, I swear I can hear her laugh. Not loudly, just enough to remind me she was here, that we were real. If you've stayed with me this far, maybe something in this story touched you. Maybe you've seen parts of yourself in it. If you have, I'd appreciate you taking a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. I read them all, and they matter more than you think. What I learned through all of this is simple, but not easy. Your legacy isn't just about who gets what. It's about what you protect. It's about whether the people you leave behind remember being loved or just being accounted for. Eleanor understood that difference. And in the end, she made sure love was the last thing standing. So if there's one thing I'll leave you with, it's this family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up when there's nothing left to take, only something left to care for.